I'm 16 years old, still navigating high school and living a life split between two households. My mom, Claire, is 40, and she married my stepdad, Mark, 2 years ago. They seemed like a good fit at first, until they weren't. My parents never married. I'm the product of a brief post-college fling that ended with my mom deciding to keep me, even though she could have easily taken another path. My dad, Tom, also stepped up and insisted on being part of my life. And they've managed to share custody of me ever since. Every month, I alternate between my mom's and dad's homes. It's not the perfect setup, but they've made sacrifices to keep it as easy as possible for me. Both chose to stay in the same city, passing up career opportunities so I wouldn't be stuck traveling long distances. I didn't fully understand the weight of their choices until recently. My mom gave up potential relationships, focusing solely on raising me. She shared all of this with me as a way to explain why I should appreciate Mark and make an effort to accept him. But honestly, I didn't ask for these sacrifices. She made them, and now I'm supposed to owe her for it? When Mark entered the picture, I was cautiously optimistic. He wasn't mean or rude, just absent. He didn't engage with me, didn't acknowledge me. Over time, it became clear that his indifference wasn't just his personality, it was intentional. One day, he simply stopped talking to me altogether. No arguments, no clear incident, just silence. It's been like that for 3 years now. He doesn't yell or criticize me, he just acts like I'm invisible. If I enter a room, he leaves. If I say something, he pretends he didn't hear me. I asked my mom if I'd done something to upset him, but she brushed it off, saying he just needed time to adjust to having a stepson. I found that excuse hard to swallow. Mark has 2 sons, Chris, 15, and Luke, 12, from his previous marriage. Their mom passed away in a car accident, so it's not like he's unfamiliar with kids. Still, they don't talk to me either, which feels orchestrated. Living in that house became emotionally exhausting. It felt like being a ghost among the living. My mom tried to justify it, saying Mark had personal reasons for his behavior that she couldn't share with me. I should deal with it, she'd say, reminding me of all the sacrifices she made for me. It was like she was trading my peace of mind for her happiness, and I was supposed to be okay with that. The trip that broke me, the breaking point, came last month. I was at my mom's house as usual, but I wasn't in a great place mentally. School drama, fights with friends, it all piled up. Then, one morning, I woke up to an empty house. No one was home, no note, no text, nothing. Panicked, I called my mom. She answered and casually mentioned they'd gone on a road trip for a week. She asked me to stay home and watch the house. I couldn't believe it. She didn't even tell me they were leaving. I wasn't some live-in security guard. When I told her how unfair it was to expect me to sit alone for a week, she dismissed my feelings. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," she said, and hung up. That was it for me. I tried calling her back, but she ignored my calls. Furious and hurt, I packed my things, left the keys under a plant by the front door, and went to my dad's house. I'd had enough of being treated like an afterthought. When I arrived, my dad was surprised. I was supposed to stay with my mom until the end of the month. I broke down and told him everything, Mark's cold behavior, his kids' treatment of me, and how my mom refused to address it. I even confessed about being left alone without notice. For the first time in years, I felt like someone actually cared about what I was going through. That day marked the beginning of a chain reaction I never saw coming. When I finished spilling everything to my dad, he sat there for a moment, quiet. I could see the anger boiling just beneath the surface, but he didn't explode or yell. Instead, he said, "I'm sorry you've been dealing with this, and I'm going to fix it." That was the first time I felt some weight lift off my chest. For years, I had carried this alone because I didn't want to stir the pot between my parents. But now, I didn't have to. I stayed at my dad's house, and for the first few days, things felt oddly peaceful. My mom didn't call to check on me, didn't ask why I left. It was like she didn't even notice I was gone. Then, on the 5th day, my phone finally rang. I picked it up, expecting maybe an apology or at least a conversation. Instead, I was greeted by my mom screaming at me. "How could you leave the house empty?" she yelled. "Do you know what you've done?" Confused, I asked her what she was talking about. That's when she told me the house had been robbed. Someone had broken in and taken a bunch of stuff, TV, electronics, even some of Mark's expensive tools. She blamed me for all of it. "You were supposed to stay there. I trusted you," she shouted, as if I'd been the one to personally hand the keys to the burglars. I tried to explain that I'd called her multiple times to let her know I was leaving, but she wasn't having it. She kept cutting me off, saying I should have texted her instead. Yeah, maybe I should have, but at the time I was too angry to think straight. Besides, if she cared so much, why didn't she pick up the phone? The argument spiraled from there. I told her how unfair it was to leave me home alone without even telling me they were leaving. Her response? "You're making everything about yourself. We just wanted a little family trip." That word, family, hit me like a punch to the gut. Clearly, I wasn't part of hers anymore. I hung up the phone after she started blaming me for not being responsible enough. Not long after, Mark called. For the first time in 3 years, the man actually spoke to me, but not to apologize. No, he called to yell at me too. His words were sharp and cruel, dripping with resentment. He accused me of being selfish, careless, and, most bizarrely, the reason their family couldn't be happy. I didn't even know how to respond to that. I just hung up and blocked his number. When I told my dad about the robbery and the phone calls, he was livid. Not at me, but at my mom. He said, "She left you home alone, didn't tell you she was leaving, ignored your calls, and now she's blaming you. No, we're not letting this slide." That night, he called my mom. I wasn't in the room, but I could hear his voice echoing through the walls. He wasn't yelling, but his tone was firm, unshakable. He laid everything out, from how I'd been treated by Mark and his kids to how unfair it was to blame me for the robbery. My dad had always been a calm guy, but I could tell he wasn't going to let her off the hook this time. When he hung up, he turned to me and said, "I'm going to file for full custody. This has gone too far." I was stunned. My dad had always tried to avoid conflict with my mom, mostly for my sake. But now it felt like he was done protecting her feelings. I didn't know how to feel about it, relieved, nervous, maybe even guilty. I didn't want to be the reason they went to court, but at the same time, I couldn't keep living the way I had been. A few days later, something unexpected happened. My mom called my dad not to argue, but to confess. Turns out there was a reason Mark hated me so much, and it had nothing to do with anything I'd done. 2 years ago. Early in their relationship, Mark had asked my mom if he could move in with his kids and his elderly mother, who needed care. My mom wasn't ready for that, so instead of being honest with him, she blamed me. She told him I was a difficult child, that I'd driven away her past boyfriends, and that I'd be hostile to his family if they moved in. She even claimed I called his mom a burden and his kids little goblins. None of it was true. But Mark, trusting her, believed every word. That's why he'd stopped talking to me. He thought I was some vindictive brat trying to ruin their relationship. When Mark found out the truth, he was furious. Not at me, but at my mom. He packed his things, took his kids, and moved out. My mom called my dad in tears, begging him to talk to Mark and fix things. She said she couldn't lose her husband and her son at the same time. My dad told her flat out, "You're on your own." After Mark moved out, the silence from my mom's side was deafening. I wasn't sure if she was giving me space or just didn't know what to say, but I didn't hear from her for days. Honestly, I didn't mind. I needed the break. Living with my dad was like breathing fresh air after being stuck in a suffocating room for too long. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells or pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. But of course, it didn't last. One afternoon, my dad got a series of frantic texts from my mom. Apparently, Mark had officially filed for divorce. She was devastated, and while I felt bad for her in a distant sort of way, I couldn't find it in me to feel sorry. She had lied to him, manipulated him, and dragged me through the mud in the process. What did she expect? She begged my dad to intervene, to convince Mark to give her another chance. It was ridiculous. Why would my dad step in to save a marriage that had made my life miserable? My dad, to his credit, didn't take the bait. He told her that this was her mess to clean up and that he was focused on making sure I was okay. That didn't sit well with her. The blame game. A few days later, my mom called me. I hesitated before answering because I wasn't sure if I was ready to talk to her yet, but curiosity got the better of me. As soon as I said hello, she launched into a mix of apologies and excuses. "I know I've made mistakes, but I was only trying to keep everyone happy," she said. I never wanted things to get this bad. I didn't know what to say. Her mistakes had caused years of tension and made me feel like I didn't belong in my own home. How do you even respond to that? When I didn't reply right away, she shifted gears. Your father's being unreasonable, she continued. He's trying to take you away from me, and now Mark's leaving too. I feel like I'm losing everything. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about me or even Mark. It was about her. She wasn't upset because of how her actions had hurt us. She was upset because she was losing control. You didn't lose me, Mom, I finally said. You pushed me away. She tried to argue, but I wasn't interested in rehashing everything. For years, I'd kept quiet, trying to make things work for her sake. I couldn't do it anymore. I love you, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. But I can't keep being the one who sacrifices everything just to make you happy. I need to think about myself for once. Her response was silence. For once, she didn't have anything to say. I hung up, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty about it. A week later, I got an email from Mark. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was long, but the gist of it was simple. He was sorry. He apologized for how he had treated me, for believing my mom's lies, and for letting her paint me as the villain in their story. He admitted that he'd let his own grief over losing his wife cloud his judgment, and that he'd clung to my mom's version of events because it was easier than facing the truth. I don't expect you to forgive me, he wrote, but I needed you to know that I was wrong, and I deeply regret the way I treated you. It was the first time I'd ever seen him be vulnerable, and it caught me off guard. Part of me wanted to reply, to tell him I appreciated the apology, but another part of me didn't want to open that door. I wasn't ready to deal with him, or my mom, yet. Meanwhile, my dad wasn't just sitting around. True to his word, he filed for full custody. My mom fought back hard, but the truth was on our side. Between Mark's divorce filing, my testimony, and the years of neglect, she didn't stand a chance. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a loving mother who had just made a few mistakes, but the evidence was overwhelming. The court granted my dad full custody, and for the first time, I felt like I had a say in my own life. My mom still had visitation rights, but I wasn't sure if I even wanted to use them. After everything that had happened, I needed time to heal. My dad told me it was my choice, and he wouldn't pressure me either way. I just want you to be happy, he said. You've been through enough. For the first time in years, I believed him. Life with my dad felt like a fresh start. The house was quiet in the best way. No tension, no silent treatments, no walking into a room and feeling like I didn't belong. For the first time in years, I felt safe. I could focus on school, my friends, and just being a normal teenager. But even with that peace, everything that had happened still weighed on me. I had spent years blaming myself for Mark's behavior, convinced I'd done something to deserve his treatment. Now I knew the truth. It wasn't me. It was my mom. She had fed him lies, manipulated him to avoid facing her own insecurities, and made me the scapegoat. The relief of knowing it wasn't my fault was real, but it didn't make the pain disappear, it just gave it a name. I spent a lot of time talking to my dad about it. He was patient, listening without interrupting or trying to fix everything. He didn't sugarcoat the situation either. Your mom made mistakes, Katie, he told me one evening, big ones. But it doesn't mean she doesn't love you. She's just lost in her own way. That was hard to hear. I knew he was right, but it didn't make it any easier to forgive her. How do you forgive someone who put their own happiness above your well-being for years? It took a few months before I felt ready to see my mom again. She had visitation rights, and while the court couldn't force me to go, I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. I wasn't sure what to expect. An apology, an explanation, maybe even a denial. What I got instead was nothing. When I arrived, she hugged me tightly, but it felt more desperate than loving. She didn't say anything about what had happened, just acted like everything was fine. It was jarring. We sat in the living room making small talk, but it felt forced, like neither of us knew how to bridge the gap that had grown between us. Eventually, I asked her about Mark. She shrugged, her eyes downcast. He's gone, she said simply. I don't want to talk about him. That was it. No accountability, no acknowledgement of what she'd done, just avoidance. It frustrated me, but I didn't push. I wasn't ready for another fight, and honestly, I didn't think she was either. By the time the visit ended, I felt more exhausted than anything else. It was clear that she wasn't ready to face the truth, and maybe she never would be. While my relationship with my mom remained rocky, things with my friends started to improve. After everything blew up at home, I realized how much I'd been isolating myself. For years, I had been so consumed by the drama with my mom and Mark that I hadn't let anyone get close. But now, with that weight lifted, I had space to let people in again. I started hanging out with my friends more, making an effort to rebuild the connections I'd let slip. It wasn't easy at first. There was still a part of me that hesitated to trust, worried that they might let me down like my mom had. But little by little, I let those walls down. One of my closest friends, Sarah, was the first person I opened up to about everything. I told her about Mark's coldness, my mom's lies, and how it had all come crashing down. She listened without judgment, and when I finished, she said something that stuck with me. "You've been through hell," she said, "but you're still standing. That says a lot about you." For the first time, I started to see myself as more than just a victim of my circumstances. I had survived years of emotional neglect and manipulation. I had stood up for myself, even when it was hard. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was starting to thrive. Through it all, my dad was my rock. He never pushed me to talk, but he was always there when I needed to. He encouraged me to focus on my passions, landscape design, drawing, and even a bit of writing. He wanted me to have something that was mine, something that could bring me joy and purpose. He also reminded me in subtle ways that I wasn't alone. Whether it was a shared dinner, a spontaneous trip to the park, or just watching TV together, he made sure I felt supported. It wasn't flashy or over the top. It was steady, dependable, and exactly what I needed. "Life's going to throw a lot of curveballs at you," he said one evening. "But you're stronger than you think. You've already proven that." Those words stayed with me. For so long, I had felt powerless, like my life was controlled by other people's choices. Now I was starting to take that power back. As the months went by, I started to rebuild. I focused on school, reconnected with my friends, and leaned on my dad for support. I wasn't sure what the future held for my relationship with my mom, but for now, I was okay with that uncertainty. Some days were harder than others. There were moments when I missed the closeness I used to have with my mom, moments when I wondered if we'd ever get back to that place. But then I reminded myself that I couldn't control her actions, only my own. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. The wounds my mom and Mark had left were still there, but they were healing. Slowly but surely, I was learning to let go of the past and embrace the life I had in front of me. It's been over a year since everything fell apart, and looking back, it feels like I've lived several lifetimes in such a short span. When I was in the thick of it, Mark's silence, my mom's excuses, the feeling of being invisible, I thought I'd never get out. I thought that was just my life now, something I'd have to endure forever. But life has a funny way of moving forward, even when you think you're stuck. Living with my dad has been a blessing. He's not perfect. He can be overly cautious and forgetful about little things, but he listens. He makes me feel like I matter. I never realized how much I needed that until I finally had it. My relationship with my mom is complicated. I haven't blocked her or cut her off completely, but things aren't the same, and I don't think they ever will be. She still tries to act like nothing happened, as if ignoring the past will make it disappear. I've stopped expecting an apology or an acknowledgement of the damage she caused. The thing is, I've come to accept that I can't change her. I can't make her see what she did to me or how deeply it hurt. All I can do is decide how much space I'm willing to give her in my life. Right now, that space is pretty small. An occasional phone call, a polite text here and there. It's not much, but it's what I can handle. There are moments when I miss the version of her I used to know. The mom who seemed to put me first and wanted the best for me. But then I remind myself that love isn't about nostalgia. It's about actions. Her actions made it clear where her priorities were, and I have to protect myself from getting hurt again. Mark followed through with the divorce. From what I've heard through the grapevine, he's doing okay. He moved back to his old neighborhood with his kids, and we haven't spoken since his email. I never responded, and I don't regret it. I appreciate his apology, but I'm not ready to open that door again. Maybe one day I'll feel differently. For now, it's enough to know that he recognizes the harm he caused. What I do hope is that his kids are doing all right. They were just as much victims of this situation as I was, caught in the crossfire of two adults who didn't know how to communicate. I don't blame them for how they treated me. They were following their dad's lead, just like I tried to follow my mom's. This whole experience has taught me more about myself than I ever thought possible. For years, I let myself believe I was powerless, that my voice didn't matter. But standing up for myself, telling my dad the truth, walking away from my mom's house, and deciding what kind of relationship I wanted with her showed me just how much strength I have. I've learned that it's okay to set boundaries, even with people you love. It's okay to prioritize your own mental health and happiness. It doesn't make you selfish, it makes you human. I used to think that loving someone meant sacrificing everything for them, but now I know that love has to be mutual. It has to be balanced. Otherwise, it's just control disguised as care. Now, I'm focusing on what's ahead. I'm finishing high school soon, and I've been thinking about college. My dad is encouraging me to pursue landscape design, something I've always been passionate about. It's exciting to imagine a future where I can build something of my own, where I can create beauty and stability, things I didn't always have growing up. As for my mom, I'm leaving the door open, but just a crack. I don't know if we'll ever have the relationship we used to, but I'm at peace with that. I've realized that healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it just means letting go. I've also started journaling again, something I'd stopped doing when things got tough. Writing helps me make sense of everything, and maybe one day I'll look back on these entries and see how far I've come. For now, it's enough to know that I'm still standing, still growing, still moving forward. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that you don't have to carry the weight of someone else's choices. My mom made her decisions, and Mark made his, but those decisions don't define me. I define me. Life is messy, and people are flawed. But even in the chaos, there's room for growth, for healing, and for hope. I found mine, and I'm holding on to it with everything I've got. This isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning of a new chapter. Story 2. This narrative has a title. My sister blamed me for her divorce. My family supported her, but karma came back to haunt us 3 years later. Hello everyone. I just wanted to let you know about something that's actually happening. As I devote a lot of time and effort into researching these tales to continue providing you with the best content, the channel has been slowing down a little lately. It would mean the world to me if you found enjoyment in what I do. Assuming you click the subscribe button, your assistance is crucial to the success of our adventure and makes all the difference. I really appreciate you being here with me. Let's begin the video now. Growing up, it seemed like my sister Hannah could do no wrong. The OP begins. My mother in particular showered her with affection. I was the afterthought, the younger sibling. Hannah was able to get what she desired. No inquiries were made. I was told if I wanted anything, you must earn it. Nor was it always about huge things, little things like having the TV remote for the evening or grabbing the last piece of pizza. It came naturally to her. It was conditional with me. When I was 10 years old. If I didn't get what I wanted, I stopped bothering to ask. Rejection was out of the question. Rather, I would quietly get by with what I had, wishing to stay out of trouble. Hannah. Being the focus of attention was what she lived on. My parents would encourage me to cease being tough when I objected to her controlling me. I quote, "We heard that Hannah is older more times than I can count. She is more knowledgeable, even though she obviously didn't." The worst thing was that at the time, I didn't even despise her for it. My sister was someone I wanted to like. Yes, I did. I hoped that we were on the same side. She hardly ever treated me the way we did. Though in order to maintain her good position with our parents, she could have thrown me under the bus. She wouldn't think twice. As we grew older, that trend remained constant. Hannah became engaged to Jacob, a man I genuinely believed was far too wonderful for her by the time she was 25. In every aspect, he was the total opposite of her. Mature, considerate, and grounded. It was my hope that marriage would help her grow up and escape her egocentric world. Jacob might provide the stability she required. That even appeared to be possible for a time. Jacob appeared to be committed to Hannah, and Hannah appeared to be truly pleased. Within a year of their wedding, however, the fractures began to show because old habits die hard. She wasn't exactly concealing her actions either. During a visit to my parents' place, I heard her discussing Jacob's lack of interest with a friend over the phone. She claimed that he had lost his sense of humor and was overly serious. It seemed to me that he was merely attempting to act like a responsible adult. My parents, however, brushed off any worries. Every time Jacob mentioned her excessive spending or late nights, they would support her. She is still quite young. They would advise Jacob to give up attempting to manipulate her. It seemed as though nothing had changed since our childhood. Hannah was free to behave however she pleased, and anyone who attempted to hold her responsible was the issue. I began to notice things that unnerved me, but I wasn't close enough to Jacob to discuss it with him. First of all, Hannah was abnormally dependent on her phone. She would grab it if it buzzed and leave the room right away. She would either urge Jacob not to worry about it or dismiss it with an evasive response if he inquired who it was. She seemed to be challenging him to ask more questions in order to accuse him of being domineering. The moment I noticed a message on her phone was a game changer for me. I wasn't spying. While she got something out of the refrigerator, she had left it on the kitchen counter. The screen came to life, revealing a message from Ella concerning a hotel meeting. I felt sick to my stomach. I had no idea who it was, but I didn't think it was merely a friend. The message wasn't very subtle in its wording. I knew better than to think there was some innocent explanation. Weeks passed while I contemplated my options. Shall I tell Jacob? Shall I go up to Hannah? Or ought I to keep my distance? Wasn't gullible. I was aware of the consequences of saying anything. Hannah would most likely find a way to paint me as the bad guy, and my parents would instantly support her. I attempted to persuade myself that perhaps I wasn't meant for it. Perhaps Jacob would work it out himself, but I knew in my heart that I was just afraid. When Hannah introduced us to Noah, a friend from her new work a few months later, things became more heated. I knew there was more to the story as soon as I saw him. Yes, he was pleasant, but his behavior with Hannah wasn't typical of a friend. They talked in whispers, shared private jokes, and were far too intimate. It wasn't subtle at all. Jacob didn't say anything, but he also appeared uncomfortable. I assumed he was attempting to have faith in his wife. My parents, meanwhile, loved Noah. He always knew what to say, was well-dressed, and was courteous. They were unaware of his and Hannah's behavior around one another, or perhaps they didn't want to be aware of it. I reasoned with myself that I shouldn't speak if Jacob wasn't. The guilt of remaining silent began to consume me, even though it wasn't my concern. When Hannah invited Noah to a family cookout, it appeared to be the last straw. It was intended to be a straightforward family gathering at the BBQ. To enjoy burgers, beverages, and a laid-back evening, my parents invited everyone to their backyard. I wasn't very excited to go. Rachel persuaded me that it might help reduce the stress I always felt around my parents and Hannah, even though I rarely was when family occasions were involved. Since it wouldn't hurt to arrive for a few hours and depart early, I consented. At first, everything appeared to be okay when we got there. Hannah was chatting with some of the neighbors while Jacob assisted Dad at the grill. Despite how little my family had ever done to make her feel welcome, Rachel made an effort to blend in and greeted everyone with grace. Although she didn't express it directly, I knew she was aware of how different the atmosphere was around Hannah. Everyone flocked to my sister, listening to her every word and giggling at her jokes. She seemed to be the sun, and the rest of us were planets around her. Then Noah arrived. I was unaware that he would be present, and judging by Jacob's expression, he hadn't either. With a six-pack in hand, Noah walked in like he owned the place and greeted everyone as if they were old friends. When Hannah saw him, her expression brightened, and she virtually rushed to embrace him. I felt a twinge of second-hand embarrassment for Jacob as he gazed at the floor. It was not long before Noah began to stir things up. Making everything about himself was something he couldn't help but do. In a matter of minutes, he was making jokes about me and everyone else. Hello, what's up with the younger brother? I'm still following Big Sister. He smirked as he asked. I ignored him and feigned a joke, but I could feel Rachel tensing up next to me. Noah's attention shifting to Rachel was the decisive moment. Without missing a beat, he commented that I had truly lucked out with her after asking her where she was from and what she did for a job. It was not a praise. He made a backhanded comment that made it obvious he didn't think I was worthy of her. To get someone like her, you have to be a real charmer, man. He laughed and remarked, I mean, she's way out of your league. Although Rachel attempted to ignore it with a kind smile, I could see the uneasiness in her eyes. Although I knew it would just make matters worse, I still wanted to tell Noah to stop talking. I remained silent in the hopes that he would become bored and stop talking. He didn't. As the evening wore on, Noah continued to poke fun at me. He would make small jabs at my career, my vehicle, and even my shoe preferences. I could manage it. He was the kind of person I was used to. Then he went too far, though. Noah spilled his drink on Rachel by mistake as she was standing by the table, chatting with my parents. She gasped and looked down in disbelief as the soda saturated the front of her dress. Oh no, someone appears to be prepared for a competition involving damp t-shirts. Noah laughed as if he had just cracked the world's funniest joke. Rachel appeared to be close to cry as her cheeks flushed crimson red. For me, that was it. I approached Noah and apologized to Rachel in a voice that could be heard by all. He gave me the impression that I had grown a second head. Calm down, dude. He shrugged and said it was a joke. I'm sorry. I said it again, firm but steady. Hannah interrupted Noah before he could answer. It wasn't that serious. Come on. You are overly sensitive. He didn't intend to reveal it. My rage boiled up as I turned to face her. Are you serious now? Rachel was embarrassed in front of everyone by him. And you're standing up for him? Hannah gave an eye roll. The mood is being ruined by you. For once, can you just let it go? A celebration is being held. As expected, my parents supported her. He had no malicious intent. According to my mother, you're exaggerating the situation. Why don't you simply say you're sorry and let's go? What I was hearing was unbelievable. I felt like a child again, being instructed to keep quiet and comply with Hannah's requests. Something broke inside of me. Years of annoyance and bitterness poured out, and I no longer gave a damn about the repercussions. Do you want to discuss destroying the atmosphere? I said, giving Hannah my whole attention. Why don't you tell everyone the truth about your relationship with Noah? Should I do it for you instead? There was silence in the backyard. Hannah's face went white, and she didn't have a snarky return for the first time that evening. I inhaled deeply and continued. Do you really believe that no one is observing how you two behave near one another? The secret discussions, the sly glances? Do you believe Jacob is blind to it? Jacob looked at Hannah, who was shaking her head wildly, and his eyes grew wide. Her voice was shaking as she said, Don't listen to him. All he's doing is attempting to stir things up. Am I? I retaliated since I had images and texts that contradicted it. Would you like to view them? Or should we wait until Jacob makes a decision? Jacob got to his feet. Anger and sadness were mixed together on his face. Which texts? His voice was trembling as he asked. I showed him the screenshots I had saved on my phone. The photos of Hannah and Noah leaving a hotel together, and the messages on Hannah's phone. After silently staring at them, Jacob turned to face Hannah. Is this accurate? He inquired. Hannah remained silent. Her face was flushed with shame and rage as she simply stood there. What a liar you are! At last, she yelled at me. You're attempting to destroy my life because you've always been envious of me. My parents immediately defended her, saying I was harsh and causing trouble. How could you harm your sister in this way? My mother glared at me as she asked, This family is being torn apart by you. It was unbelievable to me. They refused to hold Hannah responsible despite the fact that the proof is clearly in front of them. I turned to face Jacob, who was now packing and getting ready to go. I said, I'm sorry, man. I believed you should be informed. He gave a blank nod and left without saying anything else. It was chaos for the remainder of the cookout. Hannah was yelling at me. At some point during the fight, Noah had vanished, and my parents were shouting. Let's go, Rachel said as she took my hand. I experienced an odd mixture of relief and anxiety as we drove away. Although I had at last defended myself, I was aware that the consequences were just getting started. I realized that my relationship with my family would never be the same after the cookout. By revealing Hannah's actions, I had gone too far, at least in their opinion. However, I didn't feel bad about it. Even though only Jacob seemed to enjoy it, I felt as though I had done the right thing. Nevertheless, I had some of the most lonely and draining days of my life after the cookout. The backlash quickly became apparent. Hannah quickly twisted the tale to her advantage. The next day, she called our parents and sobbed about how I had lied about her relationship with Noah and destroyed her marriage. She asserted that I had always envied her success and had now managed to ruin her joy. It didn't surprise me that she would blame me. Hannah, that was textbook. The speed with which my parents took her side did surprise me. This has to be fixed. When he called me that afternoon, my dad stated, "You've already done enough harm. It breaks your sister's heart. Are you heartbroken?" I fired back. "She has been unfaithful to Jacob for several months. You're accusing me of revealing her? Do you even hear what you're saying?" She was wrong. However, it is not your duty to publicly discuss her personal problems. His voice was sharp as he spoke. You were brutal in what you did. Cruel? What I was hearing was unbelievable. She is the one who has been deceiving, lying, and causing misery to everyone else. However, I am the issue. After everything, are you really going to continue to defend her? You've always been challenging. When my mother picked up the phone, she added something. Hannah has always made an effort to maintain the family's unity. However, you've never shown her gratitude. You've gone too far now. It was there. It was the same story I had heard all my life. The golden child was Hannah. When I was the disobedient, ungrateful younger sibling, I was the glue that kept the family together. The fact that I had evidence of her adultery and that Jacob had departed as a result of her behavior was irrelevant. I was the bad guy to them because I resisted her. My father gave me an ultimatum as the conversation came to a close. You're no longer welcome in our house unless you tell your sister you're sorry and acknowledge that you were lying. Without saying another word, I hung up. Express regret. For what purpose? Speaking the truth. I couldn't have done that, not after all that had transpired. However, I was told that I was not welcome in my own family after hearing such comments. Still struck me more forcefully than I anticipated. Through it all, Rachel was my pillar of support. You don't need them, she added, giving me a firm hug when I told her what had happened. We'll work this out together. You have me. Even though her support meant the world to me, the sadness of losing my family continued to weigh heavily on me. I didn't know how to interpret it. I kept praying that they would realize their mistake, but I knew better in my heart. The remainder of the family was affected in a matter of days. After hearing tidbits of the narrative, aunts, uncles, and cousins began to get in touch, with the majority supporting Hannah. She had portrayed me as a resentful troublemaker who had made a point of ruining her marriage without cause. A few of them didn't even bother to inquire about my version of events. They simply thought I was at fault. Why couldn't you simply ignore it? When he called, one of my uncles inquired, You have no business knowing what Hannah does in her marriage. Don't you understand? Frustrated, I said. She has been deceiving Jacob and everyone else. Why is it acceptable for her to harm others, but unacceptable for me to confront her about it? He said, It's not about what's okay. It has to do with family. Additionally, what you did was inappropriate. Family. I began to lose the meaning of the word. How could they ignore Hannah's harm while discussing togetherness and loyalty? It seemed like everyone was eager to put me under the bus in order to keep the peace, because they were so desperate to preserve the appearance of a perfect family. With no other option. Rachel and I relocated out of state after I packed up our belongings. Although it wasn't a simple choice, it seemed like the only option to start over. There would only be more drama, more accusations, and more suffering if I stayed near my family. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe after Rachel and I moved into a tiny apartment in a city a few hours away. The initial months were difficult. Without any support system, I had to locate a new job and get used to living on my own. Throughout it all, Rachel was amazing. She kept me upbeat and reminded me that we were creating a better future for ourselves. Even still, there were evenings when the burden of everything was too much to bear. As I lay awake, I would mentally relive our chats, wondering if there was anything I could have said or done better. But I began to recover over time. In addition to finding a respectable work at a nearby company, Rachel and I have become closer as a result of our shared struggles. A year later, we were engaged, and I felt truly joyful for the first time in a long time. I gave Rachel a reliable source of income and a feeling of autonomy. It had never happened to me. Although it wasn't flawless, it was sufficient. I didn't hear from my relatives though, no emails, texts, or phone calls. It was as though I had completely vanished from their lives. There were times when the stillness hurt more than I wanted to acknowledge, but I made an effort not to think about it. Even though I kept telling myself that I didn't need them, I secretly hoped they would get in touch with me, to at least acknowledge the hurt they had caused. After 3 years, things carried on as usual. After getting married in a short ceremony in front of close friends, Rachel and I began accumulating money for a home. I believed that I had finally moved past the drama in my family. Then everything changed one typical afternoon. I saw her at a McDonald's drive-thru while I was getting lunch. Hannah. She was accepting money and distributing orders while working the window. I initially believed I was dreaming, but then our gazes locked. She swiftly averted her gaze, acting as though she didn't recognize me, and her face went pale. I was taken aback. Hannah was working at a fast food restaurant in a distant state. She had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. I had a lot of questions as I drove off with my order. How had she fared? What brought her here? Where were our parents too? Despite everything she had done, I couldn't get rid of the picture of her looking worn out and discouraged. I had a twinge of sympathy for her. However, another part of me recalled all the suffering she had caused, and I wasn't sure if I even cared or if I wanted to know the answers to my questions. To update one point, I couldn't stop thinking about Hannah. It felt unreal to see her behind the drive-thru window. This was the same sister who had been untouchable for the majority of my life. She was always on her feet and was the golden child, regardless of how many times she tripped. For a few days, she now appeared battered, exhausted, and human. I made an effort to forget about the experience. When Rachel saw that I was preoccupied, she inquired as to what was happening. I informed her that meeting Hannah had rekindled feelings I had previously believed to be dormant. Rachel reminded me that I wasn't required to do anything, but she didn't press me. Gently, she continued, "You owe her nothing, considering what she did to us and you." Of course, she was correct. In addition to humiliating Rachel at that cookout years ago, Hannah had caused me a great deal of suffering. Nevertheless, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to her. For what reason was she employed at a McDonald's in a different state? In all of this, where were my parents? At last, my curiosity overcame me. I made the decision to return to the McDonald's and attempt to speak with her while she was on break. I had no idea what I wanted to achieve. Perhaps the thrill of watching her wriggle is all that closure provides. I felt compelled to do it even though I wasn't sure. "What are you looking for?" Her tone was defensive yet bland as she asked. I took a seat across from her and spoke in a composed manner. "You were there the other day," I said. All I wanted to know was what had transpired. She averted her gaze while using her fork to stab her salad. "Why are you concerned?" she whispered. "It's fairly obvious that you're over me," I said. "I'm curious. You were still residing at home when I last heard from you. You quote, reworking on this right now." I gave the McDonald's behind us a hazy motion. "What took place? Hannah?" She remained silent for a moment. Then the words began to flow forth like a dam had burst. She described to me how things got out of hand after Jacob left. After a while, our parents, who had always been there for her, lost it. Her refusal to accept responsibility for anything made it impossible for them to continue supporting her lifestyle. Hannah claims that following a fight over money, they threw her out. Her voice was shaking as she said, "I had nowhere to go. So Noah and I moved in together. I have a job lined up here," he said. Thus, we arrived at this state. However, it turned out that the position never existed and that he was evading bill collectors. While he stays at home doing nothing, I'm stuck here doing this awful job. She stopped and wiped her tears. "Please accept that I am aware of my mistakes. Even though I'm aware of my mistakes, I'm currently having a lot of trouble. To get back on my feet, I simply need a little assistance. Are you able to?" Although she didn't complete the phrase, it was obvious what she meant. I gazed at her, attempting to take it all in. I had some sympathy for her. She was obviously in trouble. Additionally, she had no one to help her for the first time in her life. A different part of me, however, recalled all the suffering she had caused, how she had deceived me, alienated my family, and abandoned me to rebuild my life on my own. "I'll give it some thought," I said, getting to my feet at last. "Right now, that's all I can guarantee." Her expression was one of relief and disappointment as she nodded. "Thank you," she murmured softly. I turned to leave. My thoughts are racing. That conversation left me with more questions than answers, and I wasn't sure what I had anticipated from it. There were some inconsistencies in the story she told me. For her, my parents had always been prepared to go to any lengths. Why would they have decided to toss her out? I concluded that I needed to do more research before making any judgments because something didn't feel right. I tried to piece together what had happened after I departed by getting in touch with some old family, acquaintances, and distant relatives over the course of the following few days. The tale I discovered was even worse than I had anticipated. Hannah apparently stayed with my parents when Jacob left, bringing Noah along. She maintained that they were merely friends and that she needed a place to stay while she recovered. My parents consented to let them live there because they continued to believe her version of events. On the surface, everything appeared to be going well for a time. My parents even covered Hannah's therapy costs and assisted her in finding employment. She says she had to go through the divorce process. I discovered later that she never went to those sessions. Things took a turn for the worst about 8 months after I left. Hannah began putting pressure on my parents to give her ownership of the house. She offered to look after them in exchange and said it was for security. Despite some early misgivings, my parents ultimately gave in because they were anxious to support their golden kid. However, Hannah and Noah abruptly sold the house as soon as it was in her name. My parents were left homeless and broke after they vanished with the money. I felt sick to my stomach when I heard this. After spending their entire lives protecting Hannah and making numerous sacrifices for her, my parents were now living in a small, dilapidated apartment and barely making ends meet on my dad's pension. Hannah was the one who had betrayed them in the most heinous manner imaginable. For the next few days, I tried to take it all in. I had a flurry of feelings, including regret for not supporting my parents, rage at Hannah for her selfishness, and uncertainty about what to do next. A part of me questioned whether it was worth it to confront her once more. What could I possibly say to someone who has destroyed all of their relationships? I ultimately concluded that I had to hear it from her. During her break, I returned to the McDonald's and arranged everything on the table. The home, the cash, the current living circumstances of our parents. I could tell everything I needed to know from the expression on her face. It was all real. Hannah sobbed as she alternated between apologies and justifications. According to her, she never intended for things to get that bad. That she was now stuck in an abusive relationship with Noah as a result of his manipulation of her. I briefly experienced a glimmer of pity for her. She immediately changed the subject and accused me of being self-centered for not assisting her. She was in trouble now. "I've always made you jealous." Her voice rose as she said, "You've been waiting for an opportunity to witness my failure, and now you're taking pleasure in it." I got up and shook my head. "Do you not understand?" I said, "This has nothing to do with jealousy. This has to do with you at last taking responsibility for your actions." I gave her the numbers of local abuse support groups and women's shelters before I left. "These locations can be helpful if you're serious about leaving Noah." "But I can't," I responded. "Not after everything." Her last words to me were laced with bitterness and rage. I didn't care, though. For the first time, I realized Hannah was a self-centered, cunning individual who would not accept accountability for her deeds. At that moment, I realized I couldn't allow her to pull me back into her insanity. I was experiencing a strange range of feelings when I drove home from my altercation with Hannah at McDonald's. On the one hand, I was relieved that the truth had finally come to light. On the other hand, it made me feel exhausted and irate. How could someone twist around to make herself the victim while still causing so much pain? I mentally repeated what she had said, how she referred to me, selfish, the charges of jealousy, and I couldn't suppress a sour laugh. It was typical Hannah acting out when things didn't go her way and refusing to accept responsibility. Rachel sensed right away that something was wrong when I got home. As soon as she spotted my face, she put down her phone, which she was using to browse through while seated on the couch. How was it? She inquired. I sighed deeply as I took a seat beside her. It proceeded as smoothly as one might anticipate. I said. She acknowledged everything. Her parents were left homeless once the house was sold. Everything. Naturally, though, she attempted to paint herself as the victim and place the blame on Noah. Rachel gave a headshake. She had a frustrated and pitying expression on her face. Was she at least sorry? I said. She tried in her own way. She later accused me of being egotistical and envious for not assisting her. Rachel laughed. Incredibly so. She still believes you owe her anything despite everything she has done to you and your parents. I gave a nod. That's right. Although I was unable to assist her, I provided her with contact details for support groups and shelters. She didn't take it well if she wanted to leave Noah. Rachel grabbed my hand and squeezed it. She answered firmly, "You did the right thing. Financial assistance would simply encourage her actions. This is something she must do herself." Although her remarks gave me comfort, I was still troubled by one unresolved matter. My folks. I couldn't ignore it now that I knew the truth about what had happened to them. Because of Hannah's betrayal, they were fighting to make ends meet while living in a dilapidated apartment. There was a part of me that wanted to assist them. After all, they were my parents. However, another part of me recalled how they had mistreated me and abandoned me when I was most in need. I struggled to decide what to do over the next few days. I spent a lot of time discussing it with Rachel, and she always supported my decision. There is nothing that you owe them, I was reminded by her. However, I will back you if it brings you some peace of mind to aid them. I finally made the decision to get in touch after giving it some thought. I needed to hear their side of the story, even though I wasn't sure whether I wanted to re-establish a connection with them. I informed them in a letter that I had heard about their predicament and would be happy to speak with them if they were interested. I did not provide them with my address, but I did submit my phone number. I wasn't prepared for them to unexpectedly knock on my door. I was shocked when my father contacted me a few days after I sent the letter. There was an anxious edge to his tone, and his voice seemed older and more vulnerable than I remembered. "Thanks for getting in touch," he said. "If it's okay with you, we'd want to discuss." Halfway between our residences, we made plans to meet at a tiny cafe. They had aged so much that I was surprised to see them for the first time in years. My dad, who had always exuded confidence, suddenly appeared stooped and hesitant, while my mom was weak and exhausted. It served as a sobering reminder of how much had changed and how much time had gone by. It was an uneasy beginning to the conversation. It seemed like a wall was separating us because of the amount of hidden hurt and animosity that existed between us. However, as we conversed, the whole narrative of what transpired following my departure started to come to light. They expressed regret for how they had treated me and acknowledged that they had been wrong to support Hannah. My father clarified that although they had known in their hearts that I was speaking the truth about her affair, they were unable to accept it. With a regretful tone, he stated, "We wanted to believe the best in her. We believed that she could change things if we only gave her enough support." With tears in her eyes, my mother explained to me how Hannah had tricked them into signing the house over. "It's for our safety," she said. Her voice wavered as she spoke. "We took her word for it. Then, without telling us, she sold it. It was too late by the time we comprehended what had transpired. They told me that although they had attempted to file charges, they were limited in their legal options because they had voluntarily given her the residence. They had struggled to reconstruct their lives over the past 3 years after the betrayal, which had served as a terrible wake-up call. It was bittersweet to hear their regret, but on the one hand, it was encouraging to hear them own up to their mistakes. It reminded me of the agony of being shunned and left behind by those who were meant to love me without conditions. Finally, I remarked in a steady but circumspect tone, "I appreciate your apology, but it will take time to mend our friendship. Now that Rachel and I have our own family, preserving our harmony and contentment is my top responsibility." They appeared to comprehend as they nodded. "We appreciate you giving us the opportunity to speak. We know we don't deserve it," my father remarked. I promised them we could stay in touch and offered them my contact information before we left. We had a few phone conversations in the weeks that followed, brief and occasionally awkward, but a beginning. in order to help them relocate to a better apartment and pay for some of their medical bills. I also made arrangements for some financial support. I clarified that there were no conditions associated with this assistance. I wasn't trying to erase the past or win their love. It felt like the correct thing to do, therefore I was doing it. Since our previous talk at McDonald's, I haven't heard from Hannah. I'm not hopeful, but I do hope she's found the strength to leave Noah and seek assistance. I have made my decisions, and she has made hers. Story 3. Because her parents insisted, the story is titled Spoiled Sister Demands My Lake House for Her Honeymoon. Hello everyone. All I wanted to do was tell you the truth. Recently, the channel has been a little slower, and to be honest, I worked really hard to uncover these stories so that I could continue to provide you with the best content. It would mean the world to me if you clicked the subscribe button if you like what I do. Your assistance is crucial to the success of our adventure and makes all the difference. I really appreciate you being here with me. Let's begin the video now. It begins by saying, my parents received their lake cottage after my grandparents died. Even though we didn't go there as frequently as we formerly did, they preserved it as a vacation destination. As my sister and I grew older, our schedules became more difficult to coordinate as life became busier. The house was largely deserted by 2017. My parents seemed to be clinging to it more for nostalgic reasons than anything else, and they seldom ever went up there anymore. I was 26 years old and searching for my first house at the time. I had saved up enough money for a down payment since I started my first job at the age of 20. When my dad contacted me one evening, I assumed he wanted to check in because my folks knew I was looking for a house. Rather, he surprised me with an unexpected offer. So, have you already found a home? He inquired. Not yet, I said, continuing to look. I spoke with your mom, and we both agreed that you ought to purchase the lake cottage. I was taken aback. Hold on, what? Are you trying to sell it? After he paused, he explained. Everyone was still on the high from my sister's recent acceptance to her ideal university, but it seemed like the reality of having to pay for it was beginning to set in. My parents couldn't pay the entire tuition, and she hadn't received the scholarship she was hoping for. Her credit would be damaged, so they didn't want her to take out school loans. Therefore, they decided to sell the lake house and utilize the proceeds to fund her schooling. I wasn't sure how to react at first. The lake home was more than just a piece of real estate. Our family had a history of it. We felt bad about selling it, as if we were giving up a part of who we were. My parents, however, presented it as a win-win. We would rather sell it to you than a random person. You adore that house, and it will remain in the family, he added. Admittedly, I was tempted. That house held a lot of pleasant memories for me, so I didn't like the thought of someone else owning it. However, I also felt as though I was being placed in an uncomfortable situation. They made it apparent that purchasing the house would be a means of supporting my sister, whose schooling was at stake. The house wasn't the only issue. It was about taking the family's side. They maintained that this was the greatest option when I questioned them about why they couldn't sell something else or look into other possibilities. In any case, it's simply sitting there. You'd be doing us all a favor, my mother added. I consented after giving it some serious thinking and hearing my folks guilt-tripping. Even though they gave me a family discount when they sold me the house, the majority of my savings were still lost. I convinced myself that it was worthwhile. I didn't want to see the family leave the house since I adore it. In addition, I reasoned that I would be assisting my sister. When, correct? Not quite, that is. Following the transaction, the first several months were quite busy. To make the house habitable all year round, a lot of work was required. I work remotely, so the roof had leaks, the plumbing was old, and there was no internet, all of which were major issues for me. In order to figure out how to fix things, I spent nearly every weekend at the hardware store and every evening watching YouTube lessons. I was responsible for the most of the work, but my dad assisted with some of the larger ones, like rebuilding the roof. Although it was costly and time-consuming, it was rewarding to watch the house come together. It no longer felt like a vacation home by the time I moved in formally. I felt at home there. I left my mark on the establishment. New paint, new furnishings, plus a few contemporary additions like improved lighting and a smart thermostat. Even though it wasn't flawless, the fact that it was mine made all the difference. It was quite a change to live at the lake house full-time. It was much quieter than I was accustomed to. For starters, as a child, the house was constantly crowded with relatives, friends, and occasionally even neighbors who came over for a cookout. It was only me now. At first, the silence was unsettling, but I eventually came to appreciate it. The sound of birds instead of automobile horns when you wake up, and the soft sound of the sea lapping on the coast when you go to sleep has a calming effect. I created new routines, such as taking nightly walks by the lake or enjoying my coffee in the morning while watching the sunrise from the porch. I would paddle the canoe or fish off the dock on the weekends. Although it wasn't the most thrilling way of life, I needed it badly. The calm was a welcome change after years of working in the city and enduring the stress and noise. However, I couldn't get rid of the idea that my family still considered the house to be theirs, even after I had adapted to my new life. Every now and again, my mother would phone and say something like, "It's great that you get to live there for free," as though I hadn't used my own funds to purchase the house. My father used to say that he hoped I wasn't changing too much and that he wanted the house to remain authentic. I initially dismissed it. They simply needed time to get used to the fact that the house was no longer theirs, I reasoned. Then the requests arrived. My sister started asking if she might bring her friends up for a quick trip, or if my parents could use the place for weekend trips. It always seemed a little strange, but I typically answered yes to keep the peace. This was no longer a vacation house. I called it home. They even pretended that I was simply taking it from them. The house was more than just a place to dwell by 2019. I had created my life there, and I was pleased with my achievements. My partner, Taylor, moved in at that point. After some time spent together, it seemed only natural for us to move in together. Taylor and I both cherished the place, and it was even more enjoyable with a companion. Together, we began working on small tasks like creating a fire pit near the lake and planting a garden in the rear. We would discuss about our future while roasting marshmallows over the fire in the evenings. It seemed like the life I had always desired. Simple, serene, and brimming with little pleasures. Additionally, Taylor gave me a fresh perspective on the house. I had been concentrating on keeping its past intact. I was urged by Taylor to personalize it. We painted the front door a vivid blue, hung up some of our favorite pictures, and added some oddball decorations. Although it was a minor adjustment, it gave the house a distinctively ours character. Taylor S move in coincided with my sister's engagement announcement. Everyone in the family adored Mark, her college boyfriend, whom she had been seeing for a few years. In particular, my parents were ecstatic. My dad was already planning out how to help pay for the wedding, and my mom started talking about it right away. Everyone in the family was talking about the engagement. Every phone conversation, group chat, every holiday get-together. It was always about the wedding, but I didn't mind. Mark was a decent man, and my sister appeared to be truly content. Taylor and I even started hunting for lovely presents to offer them once I consented to join the bridal party. Everything appeared to be okay at first. The wedding was originally scheduled for 2020. However, it was postponed. Like many other events that year, everyone was relieved to have something to look forward to when my sister moved the date to December 2021. I was completely mistaken when I believed that the controversy around Lake House was finally over. In hindsight, there were indications that my family had not come to terms with the reality that I owned the lake house. My dad would sometimes hint at how much they missed being up there, and my mom still called it the family lake house. I made an effort to ignore it, convincing myself that it meant nothing, but I knew deep down that this would eventually become an issue once more. I began to feel like I had to be extremely cautious around my family. By the time my sister's wedding preparations got underway, my parents were still very focused on my sister, and I knew they would stop at nothing to ensure her happiness. I had no idea how far they would go or how much they would require of me. Taylor and I were enjoying a peaceful evening on the patio a few weeks prior to my sister's wedding. I believed that the wedding commotion was taking place far enough away from us to not affect us, and life at the lake cottage was tranquil. I thought my part in the bridal party was set in stone, as my parents were busy assisting my sister with the last details. Then I received a call from my sister that caught me off guard. At first, the chat was quite typical, with a few remarks about how much work still needed to be done, little talk about the wedding and her excitement. Then, without warning, she asked the question that completely upended everything. "Where are you and Taylor staying for the 2 weeks following the wedding?" she said, confused, comma. I scowled at home. "Why?" As if I were being stupid, she let out a sigh. "That will not succeed. On our honeymoon, Mark and I plan to stay at the lake house." I briefly believed I had misheard her. "Hold on, what? Are you staying? Where?" As if that were the clearest thing in the world. She repeated, "At the lake cottage. It would be okay, according to Mom and Dad." I was taken aback. It was okay according to Mom and Dad. They don't have the house to give. I own it. She dismissed that as if it didn't exist. "It's ideal for a romantic getaway. We won't have to pay for a hotel, plus it's romantic and private. Additionally, you can spend a few weeks somewhere else with Taylor. It quotes, not as though you have no choices." What I was hearing was unbelievable. "You want a free honeymoon, so you want me to leave my own house for 2 weeks? Are you serious now?" Her voice changed to one of defensiveness. "Michael, it's not a huge thing. We are related. The house has been yours for years. Is there anything you can do for me? I'm getting married." I inhaled deeply while attempting to maintain my composure. "You and Mark can stay here. I'm not leaving my house. If a romantic honeymoon is your goal, reserve a hotel, similar to everyone else." She began guilt-tripping me at that point. She continued by saying that due of all the delays, her wedding will not be precisely what she had envisioned. I was making it worse now. She said that I was spoiling her special time and acting selfishly. After that failed, she became irate. "All right," she said, "I'll just remove you from the bridal party if you continue to behave in this manner." I gave a shrug. "Do what has to be done." She seemed confused by that. She thought I would turn around, but I didn't quote T. There was stillness for a few seconds and then she hung up. I half expected my folks to call next as I sat there looking at my phone. And they did indeed. The first person to contact was my mother, who didn't waste any time in getting right to the subject. "What is this about you not allowing your sister to spend her honeymoon at the lake house?" She made a demand. "It's my house, Mom. I wasn't even asked. She simply thought she could remain here. This isn't how it operates. The lake house belongs to the family. She lost her temper. We've always had it in common. Furthermore, you wouldn't have to give it up permanently. Only 2 weeks remain." "How come you're being so tough?" I sensed that my frustration was growing. "The family lake house is no longer there. Remember how you sold it to me back in 2017? I covered the cost. Since then, I've been residing here. You cannot simply choose who is allowed to remain here." "Michael, she's your sister." Disappointment was evident in my mother's voice. Her desired wedding was not granted. "You're also destroying her honeymoon now. You want to make her happy, don't you?" "No, Mom," I firmly responded. "I don't believe it is my duty to give up my house so she can enjoy a complimentary honeymoon. That's crazy." After that, she didn't say much, but I could tell she was furious. After she hung up, my dad called a few hours later. His method was as frustrating but less sentimental. "Your mom and I think you're making a mistake," he continued, referring to Michael. "This has to do with family. After all that your sister has endured, she deserves this." "I've done a lot for her already, Dad," I answered. "Do you recall the original reason you sold me the house? It was to cover her fees at college. I've done more than enough to aid her already." He dismissed it, saying it was years ago. "This isn't the same. She is getting married. Are you small? You won't disappoint her over something as trivial as this. You want me to spend 2 weeks away from home? Dad, that's no minor thing. That's a big request. It's also totally irrational." He let out a deep sigh. "Why you're being so obstinate about this is beyond me." And then I was finished. I am not being obstinate. I'm establishing limits. I'm not going to let anyone tell me what to do with this house since it's mine. My sister texted me the following day to inform me that I had been formally rescinded from the wedding invitation. She accused me of trying to ruin her happiness and being self-centered. She claimed that I was the reason she was unable to enjoy the honeymoon of her dreams. I didn't even try to answer. What was the purpose? Nothing I said would change her decision because she had already made it. I was as frustrated as Taylor was. "How they don't see how ridiculous this is beyond me," she remarked. "It's your home. You shouldn't have to give an explanation." Even if she was correct, it didn't make things any simpler. In between guilt-tripping and outright scolding me, my parents continued to phone. Nothing I said could change their mind, and they made it plain that they believed I was at fault. I was tired, but I wasn't going to give up. I refused to be coerced by my relatives into selling my house. To put it mildly, the days after my sister revealed that I had not been invited to her wedding were uncomfortable. Her silence wasn't the only thing that affected me. It was the deluge of my folks' phone calls and SMS. They repeatedly pounded the same points like a broken record, as if they were out to break me. They accused me of being a lousy brother, selfish and thoughtless. My blood pressure rose each time my phone buzzed. The harshest messages came from my mother. "I'm very disappointed in you," she would begin, before going on a guilt trip about how my sister had already endured so much because of the delays in her wedding. The question, "Can't you just do this one thing for her?" was always at the end. Not that my dad was much better. One evening, I almost threw my phone across the floor because of the voicemail he left. He said, "Michael," in his most solemn fatherly tone, "this has to do with family. Your sister is deserving of her own moment, and it's you who's getting in the way. I hope you give it much thought as to what kind of brother you wish to be." I didn't bother to return his call. I was too furious to engage in a fruitful discussion. I vented to Taylor instead. "They're portraying me as the antagonist in this whole situation." As I paced the living room, I said, "I've already made sacrifices for her, but they don't care. The fact that this is my house doesn't matter to them. Regardless of the expense to me, their only concern is keeping her happy." Taylor gave an empathetic nod. She said, "It's not fair. For your sister, you have gone above and beyond. They can't keep requesting more sacrifices from you. They must eventually respect your bounds." Naturally, she was correct, but it didn't make things any simpler. I felt like the bad person for upsetting my family, but I also wanted to defend myself. In the midst of all of this, my sister was playing the victim and posting cryptic messages on social media about how selfishness was ruining her special day. This didn't help. My mom's sister, my Aunt Carol, called me. I thought she may provide some perspective because she's always been the more realistic member of the family. She said, "I hear there's some drama going on with the wedding," after a few minutes of catching up. I gave a sour laugh. You could say that. I told her everything. How my sister wanted to spend her honeymoon at the lake house, how things got out of hand when I refused, and how my parents supported her without consulting me. I didn't hold back. I'm venting about my parents' entitlement and their continual guilt-tripping. There was a long silence when I was done. Aunt Carol then stated, "I'm going to tell you the truth, Michael. Here, your parents are completely out of line. You own that house. It was your expense. Just because it was once your grandparents' property doesn't give them the right to treat it like a family gift." My shoulders felt lighter after hearing her say that. I had been wallowing in remorse for weeks, wondering if I was at fault. However, there was one member of my family who truly got my perspective. "That's what I've been attempting to explain. They simply don't listen," I remarked. "Despite the fact that I've already done a lot for my sister, they keep acting as though I owe her this one thing." "You owe her nothing," Aunt Carol firmly stated. "She has always been pampered by your parents, and this is the outcome. She has been conditioned to expect the world to be provided for her, and now since you're not complying, they're angry. Michael, that's not your problem. Don't back down." Her remarks provided me with the necessary clarity. After weeks for the first time, I didn't think it was crazy of me to advocate for myself. My sister and parents were free to have as many tantrums as they wanted. I had no intention of moving. As anticipated, I was not present at the wedding. Neither my sister nor my parents made contact. It appeared to be a lovely event based on the pictures I saw on social media. My parents were worn out yet proud, most likely from all the tension they had gone through, and my sister was glowing. I was glad to have escaped the drama, but I was a little bummed that I had missed it. That weekend, Taylor and I savored the peace and quiet at the lake house. Together, we cooked a delicious dinner, went to the lake, and watched a movie. It was easy and soothing, just what I needed following weeks of stress. I didn't feel like I had to be extra cautious around my relatives for once. My mother contacted a few days after the wedding. I didn't want to cope with whatever guilt trip she had planned, so I let it go to voicemail. The message was exactly what I had anticipated when I eventually listened to it. Her voice was dejected, almost defeated. "We missed you at the wedding, Michael," she added. "I don't think you two will ever get along again, and your sister is still upset. Just know that this has caused her and us a great deal of pain. You were brought up to value family, and we don't know this, Michael." I didn't reply and erased the note. I wasn't going to let that bother me because I knew what she was trying to do. I had made my decision and my parents had made theirs. It was their fault, not mine, if they were unable to respect my boundaries. The last update. I assumed that the drama would end after the wedding, but I obviously misjudged my family's capacity for resentment. My parents persisted in their guilt-tripping effort, but the tone changed from outright rage to one of disappointment, as if I had personally deceived them. About a week after the wedding, my mother left me another message one day. "Michael," she remarked in a firm yet gentle tone, "I have no idea why you're acting in this way. Your sister is inconsolable. She expected you to support her, but you failed to do so. I quote, "I'm not sure how we're going to get over this." As I heard that, I rolled my eyes. Their remarks were no longer as painful as they had been. I had questioned if I was the selfish party in this circumstance for far too long. However, I realized after everything that I wasn't. I wasn't being self-centered here. It has to do with their disregard for boundaries. Taylor was my rock, as usual. There is nothing that you owe them. One evening while we were sitting by the fire pit we had constructed together, she reminded me, "For your sister, you have gone above and beyond. The fact that you're finally saying no is simply too much for them to take." It was accurate. I had been the trustworthy one for years. When times went hard, they knew they could rely on this person to step up. In contrast, my sister had always received favors. Even if it meant putting me on the back burner, my parents went above and beyond to ensure her happiness. They had gone too far this time, but I had grown accustomed to it. My sister texted me a few days later. When I opened it, I had no idea what to anticipate. Perhaps it was just another charge or a passive-aggressive comment, but it surprised me instead. "Hey," she wrote, "I was unaware that you were the legal owner of the lake cottage. I was told by my parents that you were living there for free. I had no idea that they had sold it to finance my education. I apologize for presuming I could use it without requesting permission." Although it wasn't a complete apology, it was a positive move. At last, she appeared to grasp the wider picture. And I was appreciative of that. I considered my response carefully. I didn't want to give her a free pass, but I also didn't want to repeat the entire debate. I finally decided on something straightforward. "I appreciate you getting in touch. I hope that you and Mark are content with each other. If you ever want to talk, let me know." I didn't take it personally, but she didn't respond. Even if it didn't make everything better, at least she would admit the truth. Things began to calm down over the course of the following few weeks. I didn't mind that my parents weren't talking to me much anymore. I required the room. Taylor and I threw ourselves into little tasks and made plans for the future while we concentrated on our lives at the lake cottage. Letting go of the drama and concentrating on the important things felt nice. My Aunt Carol called me one afternoon. "How are you doing?" she inquired. "Better," I said. "It seems like things are finally getting under control." "That's good to hear," she added. "Keep in mind that you are not the villain in this situation. You've done the right thing by defending yourself, even though your sister and parents may not notice it yet. Don't allow them to cast doubt on that." I thought about what she said for a very long time. I had neglected my own needs since I was so preoccupied with maintaining harmony. However, I had to draw a line because of this circumstance. I also didn't feel bad about prioritizing myself for the first time in my life. In retrospect, I learned a lot about self-respect and limits from this entire experience. It's okay if my family never totally comprehends my viewpoint. The important thing is that I learned to stand my ground at last. There is more to the lake house than just a residence. I call it home. It is the foundation of Taylor's and my life. I will not allow anyone to take that away from me. I have no idea how my relationship with my sister and parents may develop in the future. Perhaps things will get better with time, or they might not. In any case, I'm content with my choice. I quote am concentrating on the life Taylor and I are creating together for the time being. Even though it's not flawless, it's ours, and that's sufficient.